In 1971, the American adult film industry was beginning to evolve. The old form was a jittery patchwork of short loops projected in peep booths and back rooms. The new incarnation was hinting toward theatrical screenings and narratives with a semblance of a story. Somewhere in Los Angeles, in that humid pocket of possibility, a tall, awkward man walked onto a set looking for a job hauling cables. He walked out as Johnny Wad. Before he became the defining male star of the era, John Holmes was orbiting the industry without much gravity. He had appeared in a handful of loops, and he, of course, had the physicality that would later become legend. But in a business where actors were treated like replaceable plumbing, that was not yet a career. Then, in 1971, Holmes approached director Bob Chinn, asking for work behind the camera. He offered to gaffer, he offered to grip, he offered to do whatever muscle work was needed, but there was no space for a spare pair of hands behind the camera. So Holmes told China that he had also done some acting work and then demonstrated what he later called his credentials. Chinn, by his own recollections, recognized that he was looking at something commercially singular. Holmes was not just physically gifted, he was unusually tall, lanky to the point of angularity. He had a low-key, unassuming demeanor that would appeal to the everyman. Chinn could have slotted him into a generic role. Instead, he built a vehicle. The very evening of their meeting, Chinn wrote the script for Johnny Wad. The character's surname was chosen to indicate what Holmes could bring to the role. The decision to make Holmes a private detective in Johnny Wad was not camp whimsy, it was a structural strategy. The hard-boiled detective archetype comes preloaded with narrative authority. He interrogates those he encounters. He moves through rooms with purpose. He drives his car in pursuit. By giving Holmes a badge, Chinn did something quietly revolutionary for adult film at the time. He made the male performer central to the story rather than peripheral to the act. The plot of Johnny Wad plays like a pulp paperback dragged through the Los Angeles underworld. Holmes's Wad is hired to investigate a missing woman entangled in organized crime. The film borrows the grammar of noir, shadowy interiors and whiskey tumblers, real apartments instead of sets, Marina Del Rey exteriors that feel less like production design and more like a documentary accident. Interrogations bleed into encounters, leads are pursued horizontally rather than vertically. The genre content is threaded into the narrative rather than stapled on as an afterthought. For audiences accustomed to disjointed one-set loops, that connective tissue mattered. The production itself was a pure early 70s independent outfit. Shot in Southern California on a modest budget, the film relied on very few locations and minimal lighting setups. The camera work has a rough immediacy, sometimes handheld, sometimes barely stabilized, always aware of time and cost. Sound is direct and imperfect. There is no gloss, no attempt at prestige polish. Chinn said in interviews that principal photography with the actors took just one day. He and Alex Elliott, the cameraman, would then take care of B-roll and any other required pickup shots the following day. After the reels were developed, Chinn would edit, and within a week from start to finish, the film was ready for distribution. The business model was pragmatic: keep the budget low and get it into side street theaters in what was predominantly New York and turn a small profit. What Chinn and his backers may not have fully anticipated was how strongly audiences would respond to the male lead. Theater owners quickly reported back that they needed more of Johnny Wad. Until that point, male performers were rarely credited, rarely marketed, and rarely positioned as stars. The focus was elsewhere, but Holmes disrupted that hierarchy. His physicality was the hook, but his persona and the growing Johnny Wad series were the engine. He wasn't a bad actor either. Auteurs such as Paul Thomas Anderson, director of Boogie Nights, have since said that Holmes showed talent in this arena, that he brought an easy, natural presence to the roles despite the terrible dialogue lathered with exposition. Beyond serving as a launch pad for John Holmes, the supporting cast heightens the overall production. Andy Bellamy, credited as Miss Bellamy, plays the girlfriend of missing Jeannie Hamilton, and it is she who sets the narrative in motion by paying Wad to find her. Sandy Dempsey appears as Sandy Hamilton, one half of the Hamilton sisters, at the center of the film's missing person plot, a plot that thickens on her paying Wad to drop the inquest into her missing sister. Dempsey brings a sophisticated femme fatale energy that really adds to the pulp noir framing. Patti Lee does her job as the missing sister, who upon her discovery also becomes embroiled with Wad. The Hamilton dynamic gives the narrative something to chase rather than existing as isolated encounters. The women are written as narrative catalysts. On the antagonistic side, Gerard Brulard appears as the kidnapper, embodying the blunt force element of the plot. His performance leans into menace without theatrical excess. Even Bob Chinn steps in front of the camera briefly as a contact at the marina, a small but telling detail that underscores how lean these productions were. Director, writer, occasional actor. In early 70s adult filmmaking, multitasking was essential. The immediate success of the original Johnny Wad film meant that the sequels came thick and fast. The character returned repeatedly throughout the 70s. Distributors could now advertise a film on the strength of Holmes' name alone. The industry, which had treated male performers as functional, suddenly had proof that a male star could sell tickets. It also arrived at a moment when adult cinema was brushing up against mainstream visibility. The early 70s saw explicit features screened in legitimate theaters, discussed in newspapers, and folded into what was later labeled the Golden Age. Johnny Wad did not aspire to art house legitimacy. It was pulp through and through, but it participated in that larger shift toward narrative ambition and theatrical presence. It proved that adult films could mimic genre structures convincingly enough to keep audiences invested between scenes. As Holmes's fame grew, the line between actor and character thinned. Johnny Wad's cool detachment bled into Holmes's public persona. He also ended up being an informant for LAPD, developed a debilitating drug problem, which started him on his path to ultimate downfall. I will cover much more on that with a retrospective on Holmes soon. The irony is that the story begins with a man asking to help behind the lens. The adult film industry in 1971 was not built on grand auditions or studio contracts. It was built on proximity, opportunism, and with Holmes, an innate physical gift. Looking back, Johnny Wad feels less like a fluke and more like a pivot point. It did not invent narrative adult film, but it sharpened the formula. It did not invent the male star, but it demonstrated his commercial viability. The mystery Johnny Wad cracked was never the missing girl. It was how to turn a man into a myth and a myth into a market. All said and done, by the time the credits rolled, the volunteer gaffer had become a star.